Hi everybody, welcome to this Timpson webinar. This is our 9th webinar in our series. I'm Helen Trivedi. I'm one of the researchers on the Alex Timpson Attachment and Trauma Programme in schools. And I'm just going to take us through some of the housekeeping so that you know what to expect from the session, and then I'll hand over to Neil, who will introduce our speakers today.
Thank you very much, Helen. My name is Neil Harrison. I'm Deputy Director of the Rees Centre at the University of Oxford. For those of you who don't know us, the Rees Centre is a specialist research centre, and we focus on the educational and life outcomes for children in and around the social care system and adults who had experience of children's social care in the past. And as Helen said, this webinar today is part of the Alex Timpson Attachment and Trauma in Schools programme. That's a 5-year research programme. We're about 3.5 years into that now, and we're working with 300 schools across England, across 25 different local authorities, to look at the impact of attachment and trauma training on the staff in those schools, but also on the way in which policy develops in those schools, and also obviously on the children themselves as well. There's lots more information about the Timpson programme on our website, which you can find through the Department of Education at the University of Oxford, and also we have our own YouTube channel as well, where you'll be able to ultimately find the recording from today, but also recordings of our previous webinars as well. So this is webinar number 9 within the series. So hopefully these are of use to people, and as Helen says, you can go back and look at them and share them with others as well. So I'm really delighted. We've got a double bill webinar today. We've got 2 speakers speaking on the same topic effectively, but from slightly different perspectives. So what we're looking at today is looking at those schools that have developed out from their training to develop a more relational approach to school policies and to practices within the school. And so first of all, we're going to hear from Alison Gray from Goodyear's End Primary School. And then second half will be Paul Nicholson from Gillingham School in Dorset. And we're going to break the session into sort of 2 halves. We're aware that some people may only want to listen to primary or listen to secondary. So after Alison has done her presentation, we'll have time for questions then. And I'll be kind of curating the questions and asking them on your behalf. So as Helen says, please do put them into the Q&A so that we've got a rich vein of questions to ask Alison in due course. And then at about halfway through, we'll switch over. Paul will then be able to do his presentation, and then we'll have questions for Paul. And if there's any time at the end, as hopefully there'll be a chance to ask both Alison and Paul any questions as well. So please do fire those across when you're ready to do so. And you don't have to wait until the end of the presentations. You can start asking questions as soon as they occur to you. So without any further ado, let me introduce Alison Gray. Thank you, Alison, for agreeing to do this today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I just wanted to give you a bit of context about our school for those of you who don't know us. We are a 2-form entry primary school situated in North Warwickshire, on the edge of Bedworth, which is an old mining town, just outside Nuneaton and bordering with Coventry. We're in an area of high social deprivation, and although numbers are fairly consistent, we do have some migration of pupils into or out of the area. We have a higher than average number of pupils eligible for pupil premium, a higher than average number of pupils with special educational needs, and a higher than average number of pupils with education, health and care plans. And that number of children with education, health and care plans has actually more than doubled since the last academic year. The children that have been identified as having a social, emotional, mental health or attachment need is actually 48% of our pupils, and those are pupils that have either already got a diagnosis or are on a waiting list for a diagnosis through CAMS. We have 12% of children with English as an additional language. Almost 2% of our children are children who are looked after. and 41% of our children have experienced adverse childhood experiences. Those are experiences that we're aware of, that parents or pupils have informed us of, so the number actually may be higher than that. Of the 48% of children identified with social, emotional, mental health needs, 81% of those have got at least one ACE. And of the 40% of children with ACEs, 78% of those do not have an identified SEMH need. So we've got quite a diverse range of pupils within school. Another little bit of background, the school has gone through a process of change. We've had a high staff turnover. There was poor leadership from the previous head who went off on long-term sick. The parents were against the school as a result of that. But in 2017, things were stabilised, a new head was put in place, there was less staff mobility and it was a much more positive place to work. But there were still some old systems in place and it was a case of one step at a time. New behaviour systems have been brought in, but others still remained, and there appeared to be more of a sticking plaster over something that was broken rather than fixing the situation. We noticed that there was a group of pupils for who our behaviour policy and approach wasn't working. They became known as sort of the usual suspects or the repeat offenders, who were regularly being reported for behavioural incidents, either in the classroom or outside during break and lunch, who were regularly spending time with senior leadership to talk about what had happened and what they should have done instead. And they could all talk about what they should do, they just weren't doing it. There was a culture in some classes and with some staff about it being a them. It's that class, it's what they're like. I don't want to be with that class next year. No one has been able to manage X, so why try and bother? It's X, it's what he's like. I don't want him in my class, you can take him out and work with him, send for SLT, they can deal with him. And when sanctions were put in place, they often caused further issues. So children refusing to comply with the sanctions, walking off, arguing over what had happened, shouting at staff. Some classes were sticking rigidly to the behaviour policy, some had amended it and some were using the policy but not following other parts. It was easier for them to remember only some of it, or it was easier to follow the bits that didn't cause confrontation. And some had added in their own rewards and incentives, which then led to other children complaining that they weren't getting that in their class. And at the time, staff used what they thought worked best for them in their class. Some members of staff were starting to feel disillusioned. I'm not making a difference, nothing I try is working, I've done everything for X and they keep throwing it back in my face. And it was beginning to affect staff mental health, so something had to change. We had the opportunity to join the Attachment Aware and Trauma Informed Schools project through our local virtual school, and this allowed us to access training for all the staff within school. We made the decision to include all staff in the training as we were aware that they would be in contact with the children at some point during the day. So this included the office staff, midday supervisors, site supervisor, librarian, caretaker, teaching assistants and teachers. And as some of our staff had more than one role within school, it also included some of our cleaners and the crossing patrol lady. I was aware of some of the training that we'd be receiving as the virtual school had done some introductory sessions. So we were able to meet with the speaker and the people that were running the training. And prior to the training happening for our school, we were able to tailor it specifically to the needs of our children and the needs of our staff, and target some of the more harder to engage staff and linking what the training that we're having directly to their role in school so they could see how it applies to them and how it will help them meet the needs of the children. So the training provided to all staff through the Stimson project gave us a better understanding of children's needs, a better understanding of the causes of their behaviour, and a better understanding of why our old systems were not working, and a better understanding of how to support the pupils' emotional needs. This helped to confirm what was already in place wasn't working. We needed something new and we needed a change in practice. The training also allowed us to understand why it wasn't working and offered some suggestions on what we could try instead. After each training session, we took away from it some of the things to try and put in place, and it became a bit of a trial and error approach. Some things worked better than others, some things we'd begun to use but needed further support with to develop and embed. And for some, we felt we needed to try something else until we found a system that worked. A combination of strategies to use in different situations with different children and at different times. It was about providing equity rather than equality, giving those children what they needed when they needed it. As a result, practice no longer matched policy. We'd now developed a practice that was working for us as a school with the pupils and the families that we support, but it didn't match the policy that was in place and readily available on our website. It was now that far removed from what we do that it needed a complete overhaul, not just a few tweaks here and there. The old policy focused on rules that must be followed, sanctions for those who chose not to follow them, and too many repeated rewards with no clear purpose of what they were for, other than to show those who were not following the rules what they were missing out on. It contained phrases such as behaviour management, negative or bad behaviour, conforming to the expectations or not, sanctions with a 5-tiered list of possible actions or bad behaviours and increasing levels of consequence for those behaviours, critical incidents just in case something happened that was even more severe than tier 5, and separate rules and consequences for lunchtime, and it actively encouraged classes to use different approaches to each other. We needed a whole school approach. We're all in this together. We work as a team to support each other. We don't work in isolation in our own classes. So we needed something that would pull the whole school together. We needed the children to feel a sense of fairness, and we needed to make transitions from one year group to another as easy for the pupils to deal with as possible. So removing the uncertainty around behaviour, the rules, the rewards, what I can and can't do, was one way of helping to keep it consistent. We also wanted staff and children to feel they were actually part of the process. It was something we were changing together. It was something we all owned, not something that was being done to them or something they had no control over. And being part of the process helped with the understanding of the message of what was changing and why, while also providing the opportunity to reinforce and go back over training we'd had and re-refine the practice that was in place. It needed to be uncomplicated, with clear and concise as possible, so that staff and parents could refer to it when needed to without having to wade through a hefty document. But we're also aware that it needed to convey enough information about what we're doing and why. The new practice was very different from what had traditionally been in place, so it needed to contain enough information for new staff to be able to run with it whilst training was put in place for them, and to fully understand the reasoning behind it. It also needed to cover all the technical information that a policy must contain. So we got together as a whole school staff, and we started with an inset day, again, for all staff to be involved with. They'd all had the training and they were all in daily contact with the children, and we were putting the policy into practice. They needed to be involved in its construction. Again, it was something done with them, not to them. We all own it and we can all create it. We focused on the positives about school first, the things that they liked about our school, the reasons why they work here, and what they would tell others about our school. We asked them to work in groups and put as much as they could on paper for us to then look at later. We then asked them to think about the children we work with. What do we want them to be able to do? What sort of individuals would we like them to be? Both now, in school, by the time they leave us, and later in life. And it wasn't just about academic qualities, but personal and social qualities. We wanted them to be citizens in society. We then asked them to think about what we do as a school to help the children to achieve these hopes. And we use these questions as an opportunity to reflect on how far we'd come as a school and the training we had received. Again, everything was written down in groups for us to then use later. At an SLT, we then met on several occasions to look at the information gathered. What were the common themes? What were the key messages for our children and our staff? What were our hopes, our aims, and our ethos as a school? This was then collated, refined as needed, and used to inform our ethos and our aims. These were then shared with teaching staff, and feedback from that was taken on board. So as part of developing our policy, from those sessions we then got our aims and our ethos sorted. At our motto, because we needed to work on our values. We didn't want rules, as this predispositioned people to think of sanctions and consequences of not following the rules, and that was the old way of thinking. Rather, we wanted them to focus on what we were aspiring to do or be as members of society. So we looked at our school motto, which is big hearts and open minds, and asked staff in a staff meeting to share what it meant to them. We then asked them to repeat that process with the children to gather their thoughts too. So we looked at what this means. As SLT, we then collated the responses again, looking for common themes and synonyms that could be grouped together. To be honest, we were surprised at how the classes had all come up with pretty much the same ideas, just in an age-appropriate way. Several suggestions were put together in ways that we hoped would be memorable for even our youngest children to refer to. And the majority of words and characteristics that the staff and children had identified could actually be used to spell out different words. These were then put to children and staff to vote on and refine, and eventually we came up with a series of words that would fit with the letters from our motto, linked to hearts, the caring side of what we do, and words linked to minds, the thinking and academic side of school. And those created our values, not rules. This is what we came up with. We use the word strive to show that we're not expecting everyone to do all of these things all of the time, but it's what we will aim for. The posters are displayed in classes and around school, and even our reception children can talk about hearts and minds and can refer to some of the values within them, as well as pointing out to staff where the poster is to help them to explain more. We've introduced a value to focus on in class 2 to help the children with their understanding of the words and how they can show these values and why they're important. So we've now got our values as well as our aims and our ethos. The rest of the policy. We had to fill in the information about what we do to support pupils and why, pulling together the training we had, the interventions and support that we offer, and the strategies that we have in place on a day-to-day basis. Then we looked at rewards and consequences. The rewards were linked to our values and tweaked based on feedback from staff as to which rewards we felt the children enjoyed, and emphasised that rewards were in recognition for effort in showing those aims or improvement towards them rather than being for the perfect pupil. We understand that we can't all have the perfect day, all day, every day. Even as adults we have off days, days where emotions get in the way of our thoughts and where we have things on our mind that stop us from focusing on other things that need to be done. And it's the same for the children. So the rewards were about spotting them trying, spotting them making a difference, spotting the small steps in improvement and recognising those steps with the children. Consequences became focused on natural and logical consequences for actions that we take rather than a means of punishment. It was about a reminder about the change in wording and a change of what happens if rather than something being done to them. And then there was the title. The title was the hardest part. How to come up with something that reflects a change in our approach but still makes it clear to parents and pupils from outside school that we're talking about behaviour. So as part of the training we'd had, we knew behaviour was about communication. So we thought about a communication policy, but then that made us think about that's to do with people phoning or emailing us. Then we thought about an emotional awareness policy, but that made us think more about PSHE. Behaviour policy, but that's what the old stuff was. So in the end, we settled for the restorative approaches to understanding behaviour, a supportive and inclusive approach to emotional regulation. We're still not 100% sure we've got it right, but that's what we're going with at the moment. So the impact. Exclusions we've seen a 90% reduction in exclusions. They've actually gone down from 20 sessions of missed learning in autumn 2019 down to just 2 sessions missed in autumn 20. Occurrences of children spending time with SLT to discuss behaviour has also reduced by 90%. Attendance has increased only marginally, but we have seen an increase. It's gone up from 95% 96.9 to 96.3. And lateness has been reduced by 94%, and that's for children who were late before registration closed. That actually reduced from 310 incidents of children being late down to just 19. So as you can see, the approach we now use in school has had a positive impact on exclusions and attendance, in particular children who were persistently late. There's also been a reduction in the amount of time that SLT have had to deal with incidents, as staff feel that they're equipped to meet the children's needs themselves. There has also been an impact on staff confidence. We asked staff to rate how confident they felt in meeting children's needs and applying the training that we've had. Staff were more aware of looking for the early warning signs, putting in preventative measures in place rather than having to deal with times when behaviour had escalated, and then not having to deal with the repercussions of children feeling that they're being done to and not agreeing with what is happening to them. Staff responses. Okay, we asked staff to share times that they felt our new approach had worked well, and I wanted to share a few of their quotes with you. Staff said, I've been using children's interests such as playing football to help the children self-regulate and to distract them away from what is making them feel angry or frustrated. In the classroom, we've been using the calm area more and activities such as colouring to help them manage when they need to calm down. Taking the children away from the situation has not only helped the child who needs intervention, but also the children in the class so they aren't being disruptive. The children in my class were talking, so I stopped each time they talked. This meant they missed a few minutes of their break as the lesson ran over slightly. I explained to them that this was a natural consequence of talking in the lesson. This had a positive impact on the amount of talking in the next lesson. Using strategies from zones of regulation to help de-escalate the child's emotional state so that emotion coaching took place has helped. And children are beginning to show empathy when they have to listen to what someone else thinks about a situation as well as their own views. We also asked staff to share what they'd learned from the training that we'd had, and they said about how they'd learned that behaviour is a result of emotions or trauma. Be patient and calm. There's a reason behind every behaviour, and those that can will. That the behaviour is only the tip of the iceberg, and also we often praise children for doing the right thing when actually they're not really trying. It's the children that have found it really difficult that we should be praising. Each behaviour is communication, and every child responds differently. If we're consistent and make the child feel safe, changes will happen. And that children's behaviour is communication. They're telling you they want help, although it doesn't always seem like it. And it's up to us to give them the support in the same way you'd help a child who's struggling with an element of learning. Relationships with the children are hugely important, so noticing the little things is vital. So as you can see, it's had an impact on staff as well as having an impact on the children in school. And at that point, has anybody got any questions?
You'll be delighted to know, Alison, we've got a good stream of questions coming in. If there are other questions, please do add them to the list, and we'll get through as many as we can in the time available. So I'll kick straight off. One of the questions is, do you still use consequences? And if so, how do these align with the more relational approach that you've been using?
We use natural and logical consequences with the children, and we talk to them about what is a natural consequence or what is a logical consequence because of what has happened to them or what they have done within school. And by talking through those, rather than it being something that we're telling them that they has got to happen or something that we're doing to them, they will often then come up with their own consequence. So they will say things like, well, I need to go and talk to them and explain how I felt when that happened, or I think I need to spend a few minutes inside calming down and then I can go back outside and join in with play.
Thank you. And another question, how did you find that all staff are on board with this shift in ethos? And if not, how did you manage the reluctance of those that were not so keen about it?
The training that we had did actually bring all staff on board. They could all see what the purpose of the training and the impact that trauma and attachment needs were having on the children. As I said earlier, we did tweak some of the training slightly so that we could target some of the staff that we knew may be a bit harder to reach and a bit harder to come along. We've also used coaching with our staff to support them in being able to make those changes and to see the new way of doing things, and they've been able to see the impact on the children, the impact on their colleagues, and actually the impact that it's had on themselves and their role within school. And they've all been on board and coming on that route with us. We're not all necessarily at the same part of the journey, but we're all going on the same journey.
That's a nice metaphor, and that actually leads in quite nicely to one of the next questions, which is, can you tell us a little bit more about what the training was, who delivered it, what the content was, and how many sessions were involved?
Yeah, we've had 3 lots of training initially. We had a session on trauma and the impact of trauma on children. We had a session on attachment needs and secure and insecure attachments and how they would present within a child. And we had a session on emotion coaching, which was all provided through the project and was run by our educational psychologists. And then since then, we've also had sessions on social emotional literacy and things like PACE and zones of regulation and play-based support for children that we've used where we've identified we've either needed a bit more support or we needed to revisit something.
That sounds like a very, very comprehensive programme. There's a large commitment clearly there from the school, I think. Is that something that sort of came from the senior leadership team? There was a single voice within that.
It came about more sort of collaboratively. We knew what was in place wasn't working, and as a whole school staff we knew something needed to change. Myself as SENCO, I'd been on some of the training through the virtual school who had already introduced things around attachment and trauma, and when we were then offered the chance to go, we sort of spoke to SLT and we all agreed that yes, we'd be part of the project, we could see how it could help children, and sort of ran with the project from there. But we have very much tried to do everything collaboratively so that everybody feels that they're part of what's happening and nobody feels like anything's being done to them.
That's really interesting. I've got 2 questions here which are about parents actually, so I'll run these 2 together because they're very similar anyway. Well, one is about how did you communicate the policy change to parents, and then the other one is about how did they respond, and have you had any feedback from parents?
We haven't had that much feedback yet. The policy is still in early days, and it may be that as things go along, things still need to be tweaked and changed as we actually run with it further. Some of our parents have been made aware of it. Not all parents have received training. COVID sort of got in the way. We wanted to run some parent information sessions and actually get the parents in and deliver some of the training to them around attachment and trauma, which hasn't happened. The policy's live on our website, and the few parents that we've spoken to that we've had feedback have said, oh, I'm really glad that you've had that training, or yes, I can see why they're now struggling with their behaviour, I can see where the emotions come in, and if they don't feel safe then they're not going to behave the way that I want them to behave. And so we've had sort of lots of conversations with a few of our parents around that, and they can see that the things that we're trying are making a difference, and some of them are now more willing to give that a go at home as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Alison. I've had 2 more questions come in, actually both about Ofsted, but I'm going to hold those because I think that they will be relevant to Paul's presentation as well. So I think if we can leave it there for you now, Alison, and move across to Paul and his presentation. If I can hand across to Paul now and ask him to talk about the interesting and exciting work.
Thanks ever so much. So even though, welcome everybody, and my name's Paul Nicholson, I'm head teacher of Gillingham Secondary School. We're Gillingham in rural North Dorset, not Gillingham in Kent. So we're I'll just get that straight right from the start. And even though we're in a very, very different context from what Alison was just describing, there are very, very many similarities. And I just want to emphasise we're really, obviously COVID has interrupted our work like very many other people as well, like everybody else really. And we're very much We don't have all the answers. We're very much midway through this process. We're still in the early stages of changing our policy and understanding truly the impact. But we've made some progress and really followed much of the training, some of the processes that Alison School has followed as well. I guess the first thing I want to say is really, for me, understanding our behaviour, the most important part of that is how our behaviour and our behaviour policy and our behaviour approaches fit into our wider school improvement work, actually. I won't only be talking about behaviour, I'll probably talk about other strands. I've been in the school for 3.5 years. It's very much how I've approached in terms of behaviour, provides greater opportunities for children as a whole. Okay, so there's some context there. We're a large secondary school. As I said, I've been in the school. This is my 4th year of the school. Previously, I was a head teacher for 9 years previously in a school in Hampshire. I was really excited by coming to the school because it had a fantastic reputation. I live fairly locally, so I was aware of the reputation. It had a really strong ethos. Behaviour was talked about a lot in the school. But of course, when you start on interview and you first start working in a new school, you spend that first term, or indeed before you even join the school, trying to understand the school a little bit more. In a big school like us, we've got well over 100 teachers, 200 staff in school. So it's very much those first few months we're trying to understand what was going on at the school. So what I did notice was that even though the school seemed very calm, it seemed very purposeful, but underlying there was a few concerns. Absence wasn't great, particularly persistent absence, particularly with our disadvantaged students. Many of those disadvantaged students were repeatedly referred to what we call our student guidance centre, which is like an internal exclusion area. They were excluded a lot, their attendance was very low, and our academic progress was slowing. Previously the school had been outstanding, children had done very well indeed on the old A to C measures. It was an outstanding school, but the school had perhaps been slow to adapt to the new Progress 8 measures, and this was impacting on progress, particularly amongst those disadvantaged boys. So I understood that something was going on. The school seemed very calm. The behaviour seemed really positive. I remember it when I was on interview, but there was clearly something going on. And I remember very well when I first saw this document. I'll let you have a look at this. This was, I first saw this in a governor's meeting. I think a governor presented it in November, and I started, and this is the exclusion document that was presented to the governors. I hadn't seen any of this information. I'd started, so I started in 17-18, and you can see, so I sat in a meeting over the 3 years previously. You could see in the first term, well, in 15-16, there were 408 days of exclusion. That had gone to 471.5, and you can see the number of students of 68 and 70 students. Many of those students were our disadvantaged students, but I found these numbers staggering. I can remember sitting in the meeting very early on thinking, what is going on? So, I'd inherited in effect a very traditional behaviour policy, and this resonated with what Alison was saying earlier. There was a very clear tariff. There was a lot of talk about the tariff. It was very clear if a child did X, then the tariff would say Y would have to happen. This resulted in a very high level of exclusion, particularly, as I said, for our most disadvantaged, vulnerable students. The ironic thing that on the surface of our school, the behaviour appeared to be the glue, if you like, that held our school together. It was the strongest, most consistent element of our school. But however, for me, the behaviour for learning was not effective. They were quiet, passive children. But more importantly, what worried me is a lack of consistency in terms of the curriculum provision, the professional learning, and our pedagogical approaches. So in many ways, it was the behaviour policy and the rigidity of that was holding back our school, which was counterintuitive because our school was jam-packed full of incredibly positive colleagues who were very experienced colleagues who were superb at working with children. But somehow the behaviour policy, this traditional, if you like, policy had begun to consume the school. So this over-reliance on sanctions gradually meant that colleagues didn't have to forge those positive relationships. They could opt in and out, which made for quite a difficult culture at times, or potentially difficult culture. So in effect, our behaviour policy was becoming quite divisive. It was in fact holding our school back. I spoke to our deputy head who was doing much of that work. She described it as speaking to the minority rather than the majority in terms of the positive climate for learning we wanted at our school. Colleagues in our school, particularly year leaders, felt it difficult to reconcile with this policy. They wanted to be proactive, to be inclusive, but the policy was forcing them to be punitive. This culture was further complicated through the lack of any consistent quality assurance. To quote a colleague, there was no lifting of the bonnet that led to a culture of generalisation. I don't think people really knew what was going on. This was reflected in me seeing this data firsthand. And that was really quite telling for me. So in the first couple of years, so when I started to see that there was a 78% decrease in the number of exclusions, we went from 471.5 days to 101.5 days. And I remember the governing body couldn't believe that we did that. And you can see we basically reduced the number of students by half in that first time, in that first year. And this resonated with, I think Alison said earlier, so what began to emerge in that first couple of years was, even though we hadn't changed the policy, the practice, my practice that I'd always done, had begun to change. But I was very nervous. You go into a new school, you know, the behaviour policy is right under the spotlight. Teachers are very keen to be supported by the behaviour policy. They want to be able to get on with their core responsibility of teaching and learning. They're watching that very carefully. So there was no way I was going to go in and overhaul the behaviour policy straight away. But our practice, certainly, or my practice as head teacher, certainly didn't match the policy that we were confronted by. And I guess what I was doing over those first couple of years was building up trust with the key people in our school, the key teams in our school, particularly the senior leadership team, and then particularly with the year leaders. I was building up that trust and understanding of what they wanted, and that, I guess, gave momentum to our work. I think it would have been it would have been an error to have barreled in and changed the policy straight away. That would have been quite counterproductive. So for me, in our journey of improvement, and we're nowhere near there yet, we've still got lots to do. We want to create that culture, a climate for learning. We want to shift the dialogue away from behaviour to learning. So we will always talk about behaviour for learning. We want our children to be inquiring, resilient learners. Remember, even though on the surface our children seemed very well behaved, they were passive. They sat there, they didn't challenge, they didn't each other, they didn't challenge the teacher, they were very quiet. And that wasn't conducive to sort of really dynamic learning. So we did a lot of work. So what I believe in passionately is, if you get your design of the curriculum right, your pedagogical approach right, your professional development, that is your core of your behaviour policy. If you get that right, if you get that real strong climate for learning where children begin to thrive, where you've got the right child following the right course with the right teacher, then behaviours for learning will improve. When you go into a school, if the curriculum's poor, the organisation of the curriculum's poor, children may be set inappropriately. Getting those things right make an enormous difference, and for me that's often overlooked in terms of content of any behaviour policy. And then of course what you want is to develop that behaviour policy that allows those teachers to focus on the core business of teaching and learning. And as Alison did, we did many of those, we did all of these other features before beginning to explore the behaviour policy. So when I had a confidence in our school improvement work, when I felt that we gained momentum, when we built up that trust, I felt it was time to more formally review and adapt the behaviour policy, because it is a school like ours, a large school, that I understood who the key architects of that change were going to be. I felt there was a momentum. I think our values were aligned. I felt then was the right time to have done it. Again, it would have been a mistake to have done that any earlier, I think. So rather like Alison, there've been three main projects. The Kate Cairns came to our school and again, this involves all the staff. We think that's really important. We did the Kate Cairns work, Young Minds work, and ARA is academic resilience. That was with our Ed Sykes at school. They've been the three main levers, and they've, again, as Neil suggested earlier, they featured a large part of our training over a significant amount of time over the last couple of years. I guess the main there's a lot of stuff on here. I do apologise, but in the middle of and we had a bit of a eureka moment. Kate came along and gave a brilliant presentation that really began to, again, we hadn't changed our policy, and she challenged me in front of the whole school, I remember it well, and said, well, you know, you're introducing all these things, Paul, but your policy is rubbish, sort it out. And everybody laughed, and that really gave me some momentum to go and do that. But there were some key sort of tangible things that we did. Again, in a large school, we identified a group of 10 attachment champions that were going to get deeper training. I think one of those is in the meeting this afternoon. And we took those from a range of people, non-teaching and teaching colleagues, and also a number of colleagues deliberately, some that were really positive and really understood this, others who were possibly more aligned to the traditional behaviour policy that we had. So we deliberately took a cross fertilisation of colleagues. We thought that was really important. So we then began to, these attachment champions began to train different groups of staff on the training that Alison described earlier on trauma and attachment needs. And that was really significant because it was a whole range of colleagues training different colleagues. And I thought that was really important. Something that's been really important in our school is the team around the student meetings. When I first started, well, for most of my career, I've been teaching for 30 years. And a lot of the time, teachers, particularly in secondary schools, don't understand some of the challenges that young people are facing, and therefore we'd expect children to build staff to build relationships with children. They wouldn't really understand some of the challenges, some of the background of these children, and sharing that with colleagues has been absolutely revolutionary for us, and it's been very important. So we now film those children talk about those experiences, and colleagues are given a lot of information about some of the challenges, and we think that's really been very, very important. We've also, obviously I mentioned the policy there, and we've also developed, you know, a very strong, well-trained pastoral hub to liaise with those key families and to liaise with external agencies, and that's been, so we've invested in that area of the school, and it's made a big difference. Alison talked about this earlier, shifting that notion of equality to equity as being a real, giving each individual child the support they need has been a real game changer to us. And I won't read it out, but I'll give you a snippet of what's at the heart of our policy, which exists in many other policies. And again, that's fairly new. Yeah, it was written in 2020. The Young Minds Conference was really important in terms of helping us to understand some of the difficulties for all of our children, particularly during the transition process, particularly for our most vulnerable students. We recognise there's a big drop off, actually, particularly for the most disadvantaged students. We hear a lot about transition, how difficult it is for all students, particularly for the most disadvantaged. So we've put quite a lot of support in there, including, so again, informing the staff about these students, enabling them to have information about the students so they can quickly form those relationships. We think that's really important, and we expect our colleagues to do that. And then, of course, if there's some really complex cases, they're assigned a key individual member of staff to support them through that transition. We believe that for our most vulnerable, if we can get that right, that will make an enormous difference. And then the academic resilience work that we did, because we kept coming up against what we understand in our school, and we haven't cracked this by any means. We know about the gap between advantaged and disadvantaged children. It's really quite acute in our school as well, and we've been trying to unpick that. And our ed psychs that we've been working with have put together the belonging scale, myself as a learner questionnaire, and that's brought out some really stark things for us to consider. Again, we haven't got all the answers in terms of what we're going to do. But it's really interesting, some of those things, you know, the people premium, persistent absentee students wanted to ask, recognised it was important to ask for help, but only 13% did compared to 80% in the other group. The 100% attendance group saw no barriers to this and more actively sought help from adults. So these children are quite withdrawn and they recognise that. Yeah, we were just talking about what we hadn't realised before this understanding, myself as a learner, work that we were doing with our ed psychs, is just how profound the impact is of moving from primary school to secondary school. And many of our disadvantaged children become even more, you know, remote, if you like, and disempowered as they move through the school. They feel as though they lose contact with their original friends. They feel as though other people are fitting in, which allows them to, which in turn makes them feel isolated and left behind. Whereas, and then also the range of interest, 100% attenders, those children who are making the most of, or who are in school all the time, relish the broad range of interests. They love that opportunity, a broad range of friends, whereas our most disadvantaged students wanted their friendship group to be very small, controlled, and to have the same interests as them. So that's been really interesting for us to understand as a school, and has really begin to shape our thinking as we move forward. So that's posed those questions. I won't read those out, but it's really how we support, how we support those group of children. And I guess what we had before was a behaviour policy that was accentuating those challenges for those young people. What we've got in place now is a behaviour policy and a staff body who understand that by and large, and are working to address that. But it's hard work. It isn't changed overnight. And I guess that's the tension, isn't it, in all this work? And this was definitely a nervousness for me, coming into a very well-established school that prided itself on behaviour, that you don't want to be perceived to be taking a soft approach. And the trick is, reinforcing to people that we still have those high expectations around behaviour and discipline, but we're taking a slightly different approach. And that's a challenge, and that's why I always think it's an error to rush into this, because it will be difficult. So here's some of the impacts. So these are surveys that we've done. There's an indicator there that parents are happy, the children feel safe. These are the standard Ofsted questions. I guess the next one's from the staff survey. I apologise for the different colours, but black are our cover supervisors. I've got to get this right. Red are support staff, TAs, and other staff, and then blue are our teachers. I guess we've done this every year, and I guess the fact that behaviour is at least good, the vast majority think that behaviour is good. 92% of teachers think it's at least good. With if you include the agree or disagree, which you would do, those figures are very positive. Our pupils feel safe at school. This consistently managing behaviour is key. Again, you're quite nervous if you change your policy that people don't think you're managing behaviour effectively. Again, 76% agree or strongly agree. I want to shift this 22% further, and we've got some more work to do there. We still got a strong, robust approach with bullying, and this calm and orderly conduct, and the fact that we're aspirational. Again, some really strong data there. So that's from the latest staff survey that was done in December this year, November, December. And if you remember, if you go back to if we look at, we talked about exclusions earlier, we still exclude students. It's a last resort, but our exclusions are wherever possible, very short and sharp. I'd far rather exclude a child if I have to, but sometimes they need to know that for me, the line's been drawn and they can't continue. One of our core values is not disrupting the learning of others. If they continue to do that, then there has to be a consequence. We think that's very, very important. So reluctantly, we will exclude, but it's very much the quality of that restorative conversation that's really, really absolutely key. I like to see the whites of their eyes. I like to engage with the parents as much as possible, or carers, and makes progress. So we do exclude, but they've come down a lot, and our most disadvantaged pupils are not getting excluded anywhere near as much as they were previously. And then our recorded behaviour incidents, there's the general stuff recorded on SIMS, has come down quite a lot. There will be a COVID effect there, we're not quite sure, but that was for that first term when all the school was in last term, so we're optimistic. And this was the Student Guidance Centre. This is an internal exclusion, if you like. When they go in there, we now interview them. We've got a trained person who interviews the children to understand why they're displaying particular behaviours. Again, we'll film them, we'll talk about that, and then we'll go back to the teachers. So it's not just in you go, it's quite designed to be quite a therapeutic area. But the pleasing thing here, if you see at the same time as we reduced exclusions, if you take the current year 11, now again this was only one term, whereas the 19th, that's the whole of the academic year, but if you take the current year 11, when they were in year 9, 830 sessions were lost. Well, in the last term, in the winter term, it was 32. So you can see there's some strong data there overall. You'll see we keep a close eye on our free school meal children, our SEN children, and you will see that boys continue to be something of a challenge, but obviously you're not talking about incredibly high numbers there, certainly compared to what we had before. So we've been pleased with the impact. I guess we see the impact in the classroom as well, with children engaged in demonstrating much more positive behaviours for learning. Other areas, we've got, our persistent absentee rate was very, very high back in 16-17. Just again, these are taken just prior to the lockdown. Our persistent absentee rates had come right down. Our absent rates among our pupil premium children had dropped quite significantly, and our attendance was improving, although it continues to need to get much better. I guess, like a lot of schools, through the lockdown period, I think we're getting better, and through the policy, we're getting better at engaging with our vulnerable families. And we've used the opportunity with COVID, where we fundamentally just had our disadvantaged children in school, to really engage with those families, to build trust with those families, to strengthen those relationships. I think that's been really important. Again, I've mentioned the sense of belonging questions we use for those children as they go into guidance, so we can learn a bit more about them, and we provide these one-page profiles for those children. You don't hear colleagues shouting at pupils very much at all. We don't accept that in our school. There's other subtle things, I think, that underpin the behaviour policy. Things like, well, we've removed bells. We did that through the lockdown period. We're going to continue that, make sure a calmer atmosphere in the school. Also, I think you trust the children to move around the school. We don't have to herd them around like sheep every hour on the hour. I quite like that free flow, and it removes quite a lot of stress from the day. We can carry on with year bubbles. We think that's positive, sort of at break times and at lunch times. We have a graduated start and end today. We're going to carry that on, so it's that calm, purposeful start. Children know that they go straight to their tutor groups. It's quite unstructured for the first 15 minutes, and then moves to that more formal structure, and that happens at the end of the day as well. And those things sort of are really important elements of our behaviour policy that are emerging and will continue to emerge. So I guess I go back to the behaviour policy only being part of that. It's all those other bits and pieces. You get your curriculum right, you get your high quality learning taking place each and every classroom, then that underpins your classroom. And then I know that Alison mentioned how important it is for the values. These are the values we've engaged with our teachers, our students, and indeed our parents, just trying to synthesize it down to those core values. And that narrative around those school values is very important. It's about a year old now. We need to take it further, but we keep referring back to this because it's these values that really underpin our behaviour policy. Okay, I've rattled through there. I do apologise. Over to you, Neil.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. That was really fantastic, really interesting, and interesting to see the impact on the kind of measurables there, which is one of the things that obviously Ofsted and other people are often very, very interested in. I've got a quick factual question, which is your behaviour policy still called a behaviour policy, or have you changed the name of it?
I'll have to check. I need to check. Yeah, I think it has changed, but I'll need to check. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. And there's another question about the training that the school went through, and whether that's publicly available. I know you mentioned Kate Cairns, which obviously that's a commercial organisation. Are the other training materials available, or are they also kind of commercially protected? You know.
Again, I'm not sure about that, Neil. Sorry, I'm not doing very well because different colleagues have attended different parts of that training, and some of it's done through Dorset, some of it's been done through the Timpson project. So I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to come back to you about that, to be honest.
No, that's okay. It's just a couple of quick factual questions there. What I'll do now is I'll go back to one of the questions that was asked earlier, because I think it's relevant to both presenters today, which is about Ofsted, and there were two questions which overlapped, and that what they were basically asking was, have Ofsted visited either of the schools since you went on this journey, and do you have any anxieties about Ofsted visiting on the basis of the very strongly behaviourist, sanction-based guidance from government? So, Paul, can I start with you on that one?
Yeah, do you want me to answer, Neil? Sorry. Well, the no, Ofsted haven't been into our school since, so that's that. But that doesn't worry me in the slightest. I'll let you into a little secret. I'm also an Ofsted inspector as well, so I'm very keen to understand the impact, and I think we've got through some of the impact that I've whistled through there. Our attendance improving, behaviour is improving, exclusion improving, children are better in the classroom. That reassures me that they're doing the right sort of things. And I also know that Ofsted don't have a preferred approach to the policies that a school adopts. Some schools take a very hardline traditional approach, others don't, and that's fine. At the end of the day, it's the impact it's having on the children in terms of their academic and personal development well-being. So, I'm very confident about that.
Thank you, Paul. Alison, is there anything you wanted to add from your experience around that?
No, pretty much the same. We haven't had Ofsted in yet. They are due, but I'm not quite sure when they're going to actually arrive. But we've got enough data backing up our cohort of children, who they are, their experiences that they've had, and the impact that our change in policy and practice has had on those children, that we're confident to be able to tell Ofsted why we've done what we've done.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, one of the other questions that I've got is about how far you feel you are into the process. Are you halfway through the journey, towards the end of the journey, or are you still taking the first steps, do you think?
Well, I don't think the journey will ever end, because you've got to keep mowing the grass, is what I would say. So I think we've made the cultural step change. I think we've made the shift in the school, and it's been well received, but you've got to maintain that and really truly embed it in your culture, and that takes time. I think that takes a whole year, 5 years worth really, of children moving through your school, the current year 7, current year 8, as they move all the way through until that's entirely embedded, and really deeply embedding that culture, I think, takes time. I don't think it's a quick fix.
And conscious of time, one final question that's just come in, which is, have you seen any impact on academic attainment? Obviously, things are very disrupted at the moment with COVID and so on. But is there anything you can point to in terms of the changes in the behaviour policy and how that's impacted on attainment?
Yeah, that's what I see the most, to be honest, Neil. Obviously, we haven't got the data. We're going through all the centre assessed grades and everything else at the moment. But in terms of, it's a whole blend of things. It's not just your approach to behaviour. That's why I talk about the design of the curriculum, your pedagogical approach, and everything else. If you get that right, if you get how you support the more vulnerable learners in a most appropriate way. So, for example, in our school, we know that some of our disadvantaged boys respond really well to frequent low stakes testing. They respond really well to the use of memory organisers. You get those things in place. As their confidence grows, their behaviour improves, and it's a cyclical thing, isn't it? So are they producing? We've got higher expectations, and they're here more often, they're engaged in their learning more often, the work they're producing is better, definitely, but not complete.
So I have a sense there that the changes that you've made in terms of the behaviour policy are part of a much wider project for the school as well. Yes. It's a multi-dimensional, multi-agency sort of approach as well, isn't it? With a number of different perspectives and stakeholders.
I couldn't agree more. It's only one strand, and I think it's a mistake if you just go in and think, all right, I'm just going to focus on the behaviour. That's why I say the curriculum is king. You get that right, those children in their lessons all day, every day. You get that right, a lot of the time the behaviour will look after itself.
Fantastic. Well, I'm conscious that we've reached the end of our hour, that we've gone a little bit over, so hopefully people are not missing other things. Just to wind up, thanks both to Paul and to Alison for your presentations today. They've been absolutely fantastic. This is a topic we probably get asked more about by schools and by virtual schools and others than any other, because they've heard about the work that's going on in certain places. They've heard the ideas about moving towards relationship policies or other relational approaches or restorative approaches, and so having these sorts of experiences and this sort of wisdom from the chalk face is so important. And we've had over 130 people on this webinar today, and I'm sure that we'll get hundreds more views when we post the recording up onto the YouTube channel. So many thanks indeed, both to Alison and to Paul for their time and for their input today. And thank you everyone for attending this webinar. We'll be doing another one in a month or two's time, and we'll advertise that through our email lists and on Twitter and via the project website as well. So keep an eye out for our next webinar. Otherwise, have a lovely evening, everyone, and thank you very much indeed. Bye bye.